we're talking about some of the big dogs. What if Sonny Dykes comes in, Catch, and is good at TCU, right? What if Sonny Dykes comes in and that success that we saw at SMU that he was able to have, he's able to translate that in TCU. What does the Big 12 look like if he's able to have instant success? Again, having an off season, familiar with the program, familiar with the area, like it's not a huge thing. He's familiar with the recruiting landscape. You know, there's certain guys who come in, Catch, and they're not familiar with the state of Texas and how to the coaching, everything in here. Sonny Dykes doesn't have that worry. So it's just basically him going down the street and say, all right, this is my new home, this is my new desk. I mean, like, I don't know if the guy had to move or not, to be quite honest with you. What does it look like if Dykes comes in and we're talking about maybe let's remove OU for a second, you know, let's say OU falls to 5th. Okay, let's put that in there. What if TCU's 3rd? And what if Texas
be a competitive conference? I think that's what we're talking. We're talking about the Big 12 going into this season. Just different since Lincoln Riley. This is kind of the way we talked about it when you first arrived, and you had Art Briles, and you had Gary Patterson doing the thing at TCU, and then you had Bob Stoops, and it felt really competitive back then. And for the last half decade, it's been Oklahoma and everybody else. In the last couple of years in the Big 12, this league is not going to be Cupcake City. And the great revenge that a lot of these Big 12 teams might have on Texas and Oklahoma is that they end up sending them to the SEC with a couple of shiners. Texas and Oklahoma walking in with black eyes and their suitcases looking battered. I mean, that is how the Big 12 wants to send them out. It's a league capable of doing that. And I feel like that is rhetoric that significantly changed from what we would have been saying last July when the SEC thing was announced. It was like, well, Texas and Oklahoma will battle for, supremacy in the Big 12 till whenever that is. Maybe 2021 was the last season and they'll just battle it out. Well, if it had been, they both would have left without championships. And I think for the rest of the way in, I think there's going to be a very competitive league. And who knows? Maybe that's actually what Texas needs. This will be my last comment. Maybe what Texas needs right before it gets to the SEC is to play in a Big 12 that's as close to the SEC from a physicality standpoint, because that's the difference now versus in 2014, 2015. The league was full of high-scoring, shoot-'em-up teams. Got to score 50 to win at least. It's a physical league now. Baylor and Oklahoma State did it by punching people in the mouth. I think that's physicality is the name of the game in the Big 12 right now. And it's why Baylor and Texas, or it's why Oklahoma and Texas didn't make the Big 12 championship game a year ago for a lot of reasons. But the fact that they weren't as physical and strong and tough as those other two teams, this is probably the best Big 12 to prepare Texas for what awaits in the SEC, because there's going to be a lot of street fights on Saturdays in the Big 12 until Texas and Oklahoma depart. And you know what? There'll be a lot of street fights when they get to the SEC. So if nothing else, at least they won't be foreign to street fights. And I kind of think, when we think about what happened against Arkansas last year, that was a Texas team not ready for a street fight. Maybe at the end of the year, that Texas-Arkansas game goes a little different, because if nothing else, at least Texas would have been in some street fights to prepare them for that street fight. I don't know. I can talk myself into, even if Texas doesn't win a Big 12 championship before they leave the Big 12, that this is going to do them some good, because the SEC is a strong physical team. And that's what this league, weirdly, at the end, is turning into a bit of SEC light, if you will.
You know what? I'm going to pull. I'm going to make you into Michael Corleone right now, because just when you think you were about to get out, I'm going to pull you back in. Just when you think you're about to end this video, I'm going to pull you back in.
Oh, no.
And maybe this could become something that we have to do for another time. But it's so interesting as we talk about, 8 wins and all these other teams and all the other all this stuff. And we're kind of, to your point, Ketch, where you said kind of having to admit and live in the world where we don't expect Texas to compete for a Big 12 championship this season. Ketch, Steve Sarkisian wasn't hired for that purpose. Like that's not what he was hired for. That wasn't the thought process that L-Ty for Chris Delcani had. The thought process was this was the guy that takes you to the promised land. So are we settling? Are we lowering the standards now? Are we moving the chains? Are we kicking the can down the road? Are we doing all these things? Yeah,
that's what I'm saying.
But that can't happen here. We can't
put your head on a pillow. Then you tell yourself what you have to tell yourself to sleep at night. And what I'm saying is Texas fans have reached the point where they've said 8-4 and Arch Manning, I can sleep at night. And yes, that is not what they would have told themselves 2 years ago that would help them sleep at night.
They didn't tell themselves that a year ago.
To admit otherwise is to admit that you're in the middle of a failure. And they're not ready to do that yet. And I get it because they got Quinn Ewers now. And they might have Arch Manning. And it makes so much sense to the brain. I get why Texas fans are telling themselves what they need to tell themselves. But yes, I think there is a brutal truth that's occurring right now. Texas fans won't want to admit it, but yes, the standards are lowering. And it's like letting the Roman Empire right through the gates. They're opening the doors. They're willingly acknowledging, I think, that it's happening. They're just telling themselves that it's okay.
The Catch, I mean, like, we're talking about a coach, one of the higher paid coaches in the country. We're talking about a staff that, we viewed as one of the better staffs, especially within the Big 12. You're talking about a 5-star quarterback that's going to be coming in with potential of another 5-star coming behind him. You're talking about the addition of Gary Patterson to help out your defense. We're talking about all these things that are being added in order to enhance this product. An amazing recruiting class that, some of those guys would take some time to develop, but you got a 5-star, well, at least one 5-star offensive lineman, one, we won't go
there. They got
two 5-star offensive linemen, like everything. You've got a Heisman Trophy candidate at running back. You got a Biletnikoff candidate at wide receiver. You've got a 5-star quarterback, and we're telling, 7 to be all right, 8 to be great. Like, who has all the components of the Death Star and says, man, we ain't got the tools to use it? Like, at some point, I get what the expectations are. Now, I'm not going to predict anything else, but there is an issue.
You didn't say they had a good defense.
I did. They brought in Gary Patterson for the defense. Every single problem that they have had, they have done something to address it in order to enhance it.
But do you know what the biggest problem might be? And look, this will not be popular. Pretend that you didn't hear me say this if you're a Texas fan and this makes you drive off the side of the road because you got YouTube working on your phone and you're able to, I don't know, whatever. Sorry, going down the Yellow Brick Road myself. I don't know that Steve Sarkisian's a good head coach. Like, maybe very good. I don't know that he's very good.
Okay.
And I think that, we see this more in the NFL and college football, where on paper, smart guy, he gets it, all these things that the next hot coordinator, right? These guys, like that dude that just got hired in Miami. He checks a lot of boxes. Players like him, innovative schemes, put him with so-and-so quarterback. Sometimes things just don't work out. And Texas has been in the last decade, they've had at various times pieces in place to be really good. Things just haven't worked out. But specifically with Steve Sarkisian as a head coach, at some point during his tenure, he's going to have to do things that he's never done as a head coach. And, you know,
what are the things we're talking about, Catch? What are the things we're talking about?
I mean, the minimum is like get to 9 wins, and then get to 10 wins, and then get to a championship game, and then win the championship game. And like, those are things that he's never done before as a head coach. And you can say, well, he was at Washington and, you know, he took over the worst program in the country. And then, you know, then he goes to SC and the SC things happen. But then he goes to Alabama, and that's when my eyes begin to roll. Oh yeah. Then if everybody was getting benefits of the doubt that had ever worked on Nick Saban's staff, there'd just be hundreds of good coaches in college football right now. Steve Sarkisian has not proven what Dave Aranda proved in a season. He's not proven what Mike Gundy's proved over a decade plus. He's not even proven at this point. I mean, I don't know what he's proven that he's pretty good. Pretty good will get you fired at Texas. That Texas wishes it had been pretty good a year ago. They weren't, but they might be pretty good this year. And pretty good is about where he's been at a high point in his career this far. You know, I didn't see it last year. I didn't see great coaching that made me think when everything else comes together, he's got this. I think there's a lot about what Steve Sarkisian does that I think should, on paper, lead to having tremendous success. However, in order for them to have tremendous success, it will mean that he has to have tremendous success for the first time. And we just haven't seen that from him yet. So if we get into this season and it's like, the quarterback plays better and they've got an all-American running back and they got one of the best receivers in the country and the offensive line is better and the defense is playing better football, but like, it's just not happening. They still have 4 or 5 losses. You know, at that point, I'm going to do that thing that Michael Corleone says when he's in The Godfather. And he says, if anything happens to my boy, I'm going to look at everybody in this room and I'm going to blame all of you. And I think that if we get into the season and we find ourselves saying, boy, it's just not happening, I'm going to be in that room. I'm going to be looking at Steve Sarkisian and I'm going, you are getting paid to make this stop happening. You are getting paid to elevate. And that's where we are. That is the elephant in the room with Texas football, which is Steve Sarkisian has to prove that he's that guy. And it's the thing that's holding Arch Manning back from committing right now. They they can't say they know. All they can say is we think. And that's kind of the story of Texas football when you look at them compared to the other schools that we've been talking about. And that's the thing about Oklahoma. We think with Oklahoma. It feels like with Baylor and Oklahoma State, we know a lot more. And that's the state of this conference. 2 coaches that you know about and a bunch of coaches that you think you know about. And Texas, I mean, Steve Sarkisian will get fired unless he elevates himself into the we know department with him. And when we say we know, it means that he can walk with the big dogs. Weirdly, Baylor and Oklahoma are big dogs right now. It just, we blinked and it happened, but there it is.
It is. And you know, one of the things I'll just add on to you, because that is a weird world that we're living in, especially we went into the world thinking that would be Oklahoma and Iowa State as the big dogs. And that just didn't happen for, you know, variety of reasons.
So we saw that it can be done.
Yeah.
If Texas does it this year, we won't ever say this about Steve Sarkisian again. He just has to do it like this entire team. They just have to do it. But just because they have to do it doesn't mean that they will do it. And that's been the story of Texas football for like a decade.
Yeah. I mean, the Sarkisian challenge is, you know, at the end of the day, you know, people have talked about the need for, you know, talent. You know, you got to get more talent, more talent. You know, that's always what I hear, you know, and I won't go into my age-old saying, but I will say this. talent talent's not the issue when you lose to Kansas. Okay, it's just not. Like you cannot give me a talent conversation, lack of talent when you're losing to a backup quarterback at Kansas and a guy who's catching the game-winning pass is a guy who's never caught a pass before. Yeah. So, so it's more. It goes deeper than talent. 6 straight losses is not about talent. Okay, 3 fourth quarter leads that are blown double digits. That's not about talent. There's other things that are involved. And Sarkisian will have to figure all those things out. And, to your point, Ketch, figure it out in a time frame that is going to have to be quicker because I don't think Texas, Ketch, wants to stumble their way into the SEC.
No.
I think Texas needs to have momentum going into the SEC. We saw this past year what Texas did against an Arkansas team who we don't consider them to be, one of the killers of that conference. They ended up being a good team, but we don't consider them to be one of the killers of the conference. Texas will have to face the killers of that conference. And look, if you're struggling against the Baylors of the world, or the Oklahoma States of the world, the Kansas of the world, TCUs, what the hell is going to happen when you got to go against, that type of guy? Ketch, I'm a huge boxing fan, right? And the one thing in boxing they do in matchmaking is you always see like they'll put the guy. It's like tune-up fights, and they'll find the tune-up guy, and they'll find that person, and that's what Texas will be. Texas will end up being the tune-up fight for everybody else until they get their shit straight. And it really has to start now. I know you're about to say something, but it really has to start now as far as getting that momentum going.
The elephant in the room in that discussion is very quickly they're going to be playing Texas A&M once a year. And Texas fans like to talk about what they think would happen if they played Texas A&M. Texas A&M is a big, strong, physical man football team. And they have some issues. They haven't been great, but they're Arkansas 2.0. Like that's the type of team they are. And that's the type of team we know Texas isn't quite ready for. Again, I hate to sound, I hate to be repetitive about it because I don't want to be, Texas fans know this as much as anybody, but it's a fascinating conversation piece. Like what, and we're going to talk about it throughout the offseason. And maybe this is the wrap up, right? Like, because this conversation will continue for months and months and months and months. But if we take Arch Manning out of the equation, if we forget about recruiting for just a moment, and we ask ourselves, where does Texas need to be at the end of the 2022 season in order to make you feel like this thing's really, really headed places? Leave that in the comments section for me. In a world where it doesn't matter what Arch Manning, like forget about that. From a football standpoint, where does this team need to be going in a league that's gotten tougher and in a league where there are no longer one pretend big dog and one true big dog? Now there are 2 big dogs and some dogs trying to figure out what kind of dogs they are. Look, for myself and Anwar Richardson, it's been a fun, enlightening conversation. I feel like Anwar, I got 30 video ideas out of this conversation. The least of which isn't, I'll tease you with this one. Just think about it. Who's more likely to win their National Player of the Year award? Bijan or Xavier? That's a video.
Yeah. And by the way, who's more likely? Who's going to win an SEC title first, Texas or Texas A&M?
You want to break? The answer today is Texas A&M.
Yeah, because they have a head start. But are we thinking that A&M is going to win it within the next couple of years? I mean, potentially.
The thing is,
I got a good
the best thing that may ever happen to Texas A&M. Speaking of videos, maybe we should turn this off and I say this in private. The best thing that may happen to Texas A&M is that the addition of Texas and Oklahoma blows up the current model that exists. And maybe if you're Texas A&M, you come out of this not having to go through through Alabama in your division moving forward. Maybe there's a little hub, a little pod, and Texas is in your pod, but Alabama's in a different pod. And then maybe the conversation changes because we will only look through it in the prism of A&M has to go through Alabama in the division before it can even get somewhere else. Maybe the sneaky thing for Texas A&M is that you find Texas arriving gets you away from the absolute closeness that you currently reside in next to Alabama. Maybe that opens a door that has never been opened before in terms of the pathway to eventually, you're still going to have to go through Alabama and Georgia, but maybe in the future, we'll see that pathway doesn't look quite as difficult if you can just get through your little pod. And we may be looking at a situation where it's Texas and Arkansas and Texas A&M and maybe Missouri or Oklahoma in a pod. Maybe that's the way you do it. Because if you're Texas A&M, you'd probably take a whole lot of Texas in your pod right now and no Alabama, if at all possible. If you tell Texas A&M you don't have to play Alabama every year, that's a life changer for them. Yeah. Texas may find that out in 2022 the hard way. Look, for Anwar, Richardson, and myself, do us a solid. Like the video if you were engaged at all. I thought the conversation was really interesting today. I'm going to steal some column ideas from it. Comments in the comments section. Like the video. Subscribe to the channel. We will talk to you again tomorrow. Thanks for listening and watching and all the above. Later.